I love exploring remote places, and when I found a hidden cabin deep in the forest on an old hiking map, I couldn't resist. The map showed no details about its owner or history, just an old symbol marking its location. Curious, I packed my gear and hiked there alone. After hours of walking, I finally arrived. The cabin was old, its wooden planks darkened with age, and vines creeping along its walls. The windows were dusty, and the door hung slightly open as if inviting me inside. I felt uneasy, but I told myself it was just the eeriness of an abandoned place. I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and old furniture covered in cobwebs filled the space. Then, I saw something that made my breath catch. A fresh set of footprints in the dust, leading deeper into the cabin. Someone had been here recently. I should have left, but something about the footprints intrigued me. I followed them. The footprints led to a small wooden trapdoor in the floor. I hesitated. Then I heard it, a faint knocking sound coming from beneath the floor. I stepped back, heart pounding. Then, suddenly, the trapdoor creaked open on its own. Darkness stared back at me. A damp, rotting smell filled the air. And then I saw a hand, pale and thin, reaching up from the darkness. I ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted out of the cabin, into the forest, running faster than I ever had before. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I turned around. The cabin was gone. Not abandoned, not collapsed, just gone. I checked my map again. The cabin was no longer marked, as if it had never existed. But I know what I saw, and I know something was waiting in that basement, something that almost got me. I booked a remote cabin in the mountains, looking for solitude and peace. The place was beautiful. Tall pine trees surrounded the cabin, and the crisp mountain air felt refreshing. The owner had left the key under the doormat, and I let myself in. Everything seemed normal at first. A cozy living room, a small kitchen, and a single bedroom. But then, I noticed something strange. There were no mirrors. Not in the bathroom, not in the bedroom, nowhere. I found it odd but shrugged it off. Maybe the owner just didn't like mirrors. I spent the first night enjoying the silence, reading by the fireplace. Then, around midnight, I heard it, a soft creaking noise from the bedroom. I turned my head slowly, my pulse quickening. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. I had left it closed. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. But when I approached the door, I saw an eye, a human eye staring at me through the crack. I jumped back, heart pounding. My mind raced. There was no one else here. I flung the door open, but the room was empty. The only thing inside was an old wooden wardrobe standing in the corner. My breath came fast and shaky. The wardrobe door was slightly open. Something inside me screamed not to look, but I had to. I stepped forward and yanked the door open. Inside, there was no one there, only a single object hanging on the back wall of the wardrobe. A mirror, a single, dusty mirror. And in its reflection, I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around, but nothing. The room was empty, but I no longer felt alone. I left that cabin before sunrise. When I returned home, I looked up the cabin online. There were no records of it ever being rented out, no reviews, no listings, as if it had never existed. But I know what I saw, and I know something was in that cabin, watching me. I rented a small, remote cabin for the weekend, hoping to enjoy some time alone in nature. The place was simple, one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a cozy fireplace. But as I was settling in, I noticed something strange. There was a second door inside the cabin. It was locked. At first, I assumed it was a storage closet or a private area the owner didn't want guests to enter. I tried to ignore it, but as the night went on, I started hearing noises coming from behind the door. Soft shuffling, faint scratching, like something was moving inside. I told myself it was probably mice or an animal that got trapped in there. Then, around midnight, the doorknob turned. I froze. Someone, or something, was on the other side. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly approached the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I placed my ear against the wood, listening. Silence. I backed away, heart pounding. Maybe I had imagined it. But just as I was about to return to bed, a single knock came from the other side. Slow, deliberate. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay another night. As I was packing my bags, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door was unlocked. I knew I hadn't touched it. The knob was now slightly turned, and the door was open just a crack. Darkness stretched beyond it. I hesitated. Then, against all common sense, I reached out and pushed the door open. Inside, there was no room, just a small, empty space. No furniture, no windows, just bare wooden walls. But the worst part? The walls were covered in deep, claw-like scratches, as if something had been trying to get out. I ran out of the cabin, jumped into my car, and never looked back. Later, I contacted the owner and asked about the locked room. He simply replied, "There's no second door in that cabin." I checked the listing photos again. He was right. In every picture of the cabin, there was only one door. I had been driving for hours, searching for a place to stay after my car broke down on a deserted mountain road. Then, as if by luck, I saw it. A small wooden cabin nestled between the trees. There was no sign of people, no car parked outside, and the windows were dark. It looked abandoned. I knocked on the door. No answer. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was musty, but everything was strangely clean. The furniture wasn't covered in dust. The fireplace had fresh logs stacked beside it. It was as if someone had just left moments ago. I hesitated, but the cold night air and the thought of sleeping in my car made the choice easy. I decided to stay just for the night. As I settled in, I noticed something odd. On the wooden table, there were 3 plates set with food, still warm. I swallowed hard. If someone had been here, where were they now? Then I heard it, a creaking sound from upstairs. I held my breath. I had checked every room when I arrived. There was no upstairs. Slowly, I turned my gaze to the ceiling, and that's when I saw it. The ceiling had a small, rectangular hatch, like an attic entrance. It had been closed when I entered. Now, it was slightly open. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the opening. The light barely reached into the darkness above. But then, a pale hand slowly gripped the edge of the hatch. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran. I didn't care about my bags. I didn't care about the freezing night. I just ran. The next day, when I returned with the police, the cabin was gone. No building, no foundation, just an empty clearing where it had stood, as if it had never been there at all. But I know what I saw, and I know something was inside that cabin with me. I planned a weekend getaway with my friend Daniel at a remote cabin deep in the woods. We arrived late in the afternoon. The cabin was simple, 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a fireplace. Nothing unusual. That night, we sat by the fire, drinking and talking. At some point, I got tired and decided to sleep early, while Daniel stayed up to finish his drink. I fell asleep quickly, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was muffled talking. I turned over in bed, listening. Daniel was still awake, whispering to someone. Confused, I sat up and called out, "Who are you talking to?" Silence. I got up and walked into the living room. Daniel was sitting on the couch, staring at the fireplace. Alone. "There was someone in here," I said, my voice uneasy. Daniel didn't respond at first. Then, in a flat tone, he said, "Go back to sleep." A chill ran through me. His voice sounded wrong, slow, hollow. I hesitated but eventually went back to bed, my skin crawling with unease. The next morning, I woke up late and found the cabin completely silent. Daniel was gone. His shoes, his bag, everything was still there. It was as if he had just disappeared. Panic set in. I searched the cabin, then the surrounding woods, calling his name. No response. Desperate, I drove to the nearest town and called the police. They searched for days. No trace of him. But here's the strangest part. When the police checked the cabin's rental records, they told me something that made my blood run cold. "Sir, according to the records, you booked the cabin alone." I insisted I came with Daniel, but they found no evidence he was ever there. No second toothbrush, no extra clothing, and the guest book at the cabin's entrance? Only my name was written inside, as if Daniel had never existed at all. I don't know what happened that night, but sometimes I wonder if I had stayed awake just a little longer, would I have disappeared, too? I had been hiking all day and lost track of time. By the time I realized it, the sun had set and darkness had swallowed the forest. I had no tent, no supplies for camping. Then, just when I thought I'd have to sleep under the trees, I saw it. A small wooden cabin standing between the trees. I was sure it hadn't been there before, but I was cold, exhausted, and desperate for shelter. I knocked on the door. No answer. I pushed it open. Inside, it was warm. The fireplace was lit, and there was a chair facing it, as if someone had just been sitting there. But the cabin was empty. Something felt wrong. Still, exhaustion won. I locked the door, set my pack down, and lay on the small bed in the corner. I told myself I'd leave at first light, but in the middle of the night, I woke up. The chair was now facing my bed. I sat up, heart pounding. I knew I hadn't moved it. Then, from the corner of the room, I heard breathing. Slow, deep. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the darkness. Nothing. The sound stopped. I barely slept after that. The moment the sun rose, I grabbed my pack and ran out of the cabin. But as soon as I stepped outside, I froze. The forest around me was different. The trail I had been following yesterday was gone. The trees looked older, twisted, as if they had been standing there for centuries. I turned back toward the cabin, but it was gone. Nothing but thick, untouched forest where it had stood. I wandered for hours before I finally found my way back to civilization. To this day, I don't know where I spent that night, but sometimes, when I hike in the deep woods, I swear I can still hear that slow, deep breathing. I was deep in the mountains, hiking alone, when a storm rolled in. The rain was heavy, and the wind howled through the trees. I needed shelter fast. That's when I saw it. A small wooden cabin standing in the middle of the forest. There were no roads leading to it, no signs of anyone living there. But the storm was getting worse, so I had no choice. I ran to the porch, knocked on the door. No answer. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Everything looked old. The furniture was covered in dust. The fireplace was cold, filled with ashes long abandoned. Yet, strangely, there were no cobwebs, as if someone had cleaned but never returned. I shook off the uneasy feeling and sat down to wait out the storm. Hours passed. The rain didn't stop. Then, at some point, I noticed something terrifying. The clock on the wall wasn't moving. Its hands were stuck at 2:13. I pulled out my phone. The time on the screen? 2:13. I checked my watch. 2:13. I swallowed hard. I had been in this cabin for hours. But according to every clock I had, time hadn't moved at all. Then I heard it. A soft ticking noise, coming from the hallway. I turned my head slowly. There was an old grandfather clock standing there. It hadn't been there before, and its pendulum was slowly swinging. Tick, tock, tick, tock. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, the ticking stopped. Silence filled the cabin, and from the darkness of the hallway, I heard footsteps coming toward me. I ran. I didn't stop until I was deep into the forest. When I finally dared to look back, the cabin was gone. No walls, no roof, no sign it had ever existed. I checked my phone again. The time had changed. 3:27 a.m. But I know what I felt in that place. I know something was in there with me. And I know, somehow, that cabin was trying to trap me in its time. I booked a cabin deep in the forest, far from civilization. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a place to disconnect. When I arrived, the cabin was perfect, cozy, warm, and surrounded by nothing but trees. At first, everything seemed normal, but on the second night, I noticed something strange. The cabin had too many windows. I was sure there had only been four when I arrived, two in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the bedroom. But now, there was another window in the hallway, and one more in the bathroom. At first, I thought I had just overlooked them, but when I checked my photos from the first day, the extra windows weren't there. I felt uneasy, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Then, later that night, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed something in the bathroom window, a reflection, but it wasn't mine. Someone was standing outside, watching me. My breath hitched. The figure was tall, pale, and had hollow, black eyes. I spun around, but there was no one outside. I turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, standing closer. I ran out of the bathroom, heart pounding. I needed to leave. Now, I grabbed my keys and rushed to the door, but stopped dead in my tracks. The cabin had even more windows now, lining the walls, covering every surface. And behind each one were dozens of pale, hollow-eyed faces, watching me. I don't remember running to my car. I don't remember driving away. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, the cabin was gone, and so were the faces. I never found that cabin again, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up to the feeling of being watched. And when I check my bedroom window, for just a second, I see those hollow eyes staring back. I was hiking alone in a remote forest when the storm hit. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain poured down, soaking me in seconds. Then, through the trees, I saw it, a small wooden cabin. It looked abandoned, but I had no other choice. I ran up to the door, knocked. No answer. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air inside was warm. The fireplace was burning, but no one was there. It felt wrong, but the storm outside was too strong, so I stayed. As I sat near the fire, trying to dry off, I heard it. A whisper. So faint, I almost thought I imagined it. Then I heard it again. A voice. Calling my name. It was coming from the back room. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here. No one should have known my name. I stood up slowly. The backroom door was slightly open. Darkness stretched beyond it. I knew I shouldn't check, but something in me, something not my own, compelled me to step forward. I reached for the door. Then the whisper came again, louder, clearer. Come in. My breath caught in my throat. I turned and ran out of the cabin. I didn't stop until I was deep in the woods, far from that cursed place. The storm had stopped. The forest was silent. I turned back toward the direction of the cabin, but it was gone, as if it had never been there at all. But I swear, even now, sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear that whisper, calling my name. I rented a remote cabin for a weekend getaway. It was supposed to be a break from everything. No work, no people, just me and the quiet of the forest. The cabin itself was perfect. Small, cozy, nothing fancy. The first night was peaceful. I sat by the fire, read a book, and fell asleep early. Then, around 3 a.m., I woke up. Something felt off. I sat up in bed, listening. The cabin was silent, too silent. Then I noticed it. The furniture was different. The chair by the fireplace was gone. The table was in the wrong place. The paintings on the wall were not the ones I remembered. It was as if I was in a different cabin, but I was sure I hadn't left. A chill ran through me. I grabbed my phone and checked the photos I had taken earlier. The furniture in the pictures didn't match what was in the cabin now. I was in the wrong place. But how? The next morning, I packed my bags and left immediately. I drove straight home, feeling a strange sense of relief as I reached my apartment. But that night, I woke up again, and my blood ran cold. The chair by my window wasn't mine. The painting on the wall, I had never seen it before. My bedroom didn't look like my bedroom. It looked like the cabin, as if, somehow, when I left, the cabin followed me. And now, I can't escape it. I love exploring remote places to escape the noise of the city. This time, I found an old cabin listed on a digital map deep within the forest. Strangely, there were no reviews or additional information, just coordinates and a single photo of a small wooden cabin. I assumed it was simply a hidden gem that few had discovered. Without much thought, I drove there. The journey took nearly 5 hours. I passed winding dirt roads, towering trees, and thick vegetation until I finally arrived. The cabin looked abandoned. Weathered wood, dusty windows, and a front porch covered in fallen leaves. But then I realized something unsettling. I don't remember booking this cabin. I don't even remember when I decided to come here. Feeling uneasy, I checked my phone's map again to confirm the location. But now, the cabin was no longer on the map. My heart began to race. I was sure I had seen it listed earlier. I tried searching for a signal, but there was none. Despite my growing unease, I convinced myself to stay the night. It was late, and I didn't want to drive back in the dark. I lit a few candles, sat in the rocking chair near the fireplace, and tried to relax. But something felt off. There was no sound outside. No birds, no insects, just an unnatural silence. Then I glanced out the window. My car tracks were gone. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed outside. The forest around me felt darker, thicker, and worse, my car was gone. I stood there, frozen. I knew I had parked right in front of the cabin. Heart pounding, I rushed back inside, locking the door behind me. I decided to wait until morning and hike toward civilization. I tried to sleep, but at midnight, I heard something. Footsteps outside. I held my breath. The steps were slow, deliberate. Someone was circling the cabin. I peered through a crack in the window. Nothing, but the footsteps continued. Then, I heard whispers. Soft, distant murmurs calling my name. Fear gripped me, but before I could react, the cabin shook violently. The wooden walls trembled as if something massive was trying to tear them down. I clutched my knife, ready for whatever was out there. Then, suddenly, silence. Everything stopped. The footsteps, the whispers, gone. I sat frozen, too scared to move, until exhaustion overtook me. When I woke up, I was no longer in the cabin. I was lying on the damp forest floor, covered in dirt and leaves. Disoriented, I looked around. The cabin was gone, as if it had never been there. I didn't understand what had happened. All I knew was I had to leave. I walked for hours until I finally reached a road where a kind driver gave me a ride back to town. Once I got home, I opened the digital map and searched for the cabin again. What I saw made my blood run cold. The cabin was back on the map, but this time, under its coordinates, there was a small note. Do not return. I don't know who left that warning, but I do know one thing. I will never go back, and I pray